Firstly, welcome everyone to this episode of Fringe Legal Edge. If this is the first time you're joining, this is a show where I speak to experts and leaders about things that will give your practice an edge, whatever your practice may be. And today, by popular demand, I have Deb Feder on the show. So Deb and I met through a mutual friend. She helps lawyers generate consistent clients through curious and confident conversations. And there's a whole bunch of things we can really talk about. And well, for one, we have a mutual liking for West Wing, the TV show.
Seriously.
I know. And I also learned as of this morning, as I researched this, that you also have a Peloton, much like myself, and are a Peloton rider. So there's many things we can talk about, but we'll try and not digress too much.
Well, my kids and I were actually talking about our love of West Wing. And I said, you don't understand, like we had this really great conversation. We were talking about West Wing, and then I got off and there was an email that said, you know me as Jed Bartlett. And I said, it was crazy. And then in the mail that day came that Entertainment Weekly that had the whole cast on the cover talking about voting and getting out the vote and promoting candidates. So it's kind of a hot topic right this second.
It is. And actually, shortly after we spoke, I went on Netflix and there it was in full glory, ready to be streamed. And I was like, oh, this is certainly a good omen. But what I wanted to talk about, we'll do quick introductions for anyone who doesn't know you first. And then really there's 3 or 4 things I wanted to dig into. They're around, teaching lawyers to listen, an important skill, very, very important skill, the importance of business development. And certainly as we posted about this on LinkedIn, it has been blowing up around your expertise in validating market data and how to do that, how to define ROI from marketing information. So, but before that, if you wouldn't mind, for anyone who doesn't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Deb Feder. I live in Kansas City. And I practiced law for 15 years, almost exclusively corporate law, both in big law, in-house, smaller offices of big law, all sorts over those 15 years. That journey's a whole nother story. And, through that time, I realized what really worked for some people and ways to practice that they were having fun and engaging with great clients, and ways that didn't work and ways that were dragging people down. And it became kind of a quest of mine. What I didn't know was the end of the time that I was going to be practicing law, to start helping it be better and make it not that you couldn't have life and work. And what I really realized was that those people who have big careers, they actually could have the biggest life too. And that if we could find a way to do that where it's not sucking up all of our time, that it made it so much more fun and so much more enjoyable. And you could build really great client relationships through talking less, not having to scramble as much, not living in the chaos. And that became my journey. And so I've been doing that for about a decade.
That's amazing. And when we spoke previously, and it was a very quick conversation, I think one of the things that stood out to me was, as you went through this, as you spoke internally at the firms you were practicing at, the importance of listening, and certainly at that time, and I think still is today, how difficult a skill it is to learn, and how sometimes bad lawyers are and legal professionals are in practicing what they preach. Because I think people get the concept behind you need to listen. You have to understand what the other person is saying. How do you find that in practice, and how do you make that practical, right? So people actually go out and do that.
So what's interesting is that often when we are talking to somebody, and I just caught myself, and I asked myself just now, am I doing it, right now? And I was. What it is that you're in the middle of a conversation and you think you need something brilliant to come out immediately after somebody else stops talking. So what it is you listen to the first part, you think you've got the gist, and then you start formulating it. So the trick that I have lawyers do is to stop and take 2 deep breaths before they respond to whatever the person said. And what happens is that often you're gonna be like, I don't really know what they just finished saying, so now what do I do? And my trick, honestly, is to say something along the lines of, I'm pondering that a little bit. Could you expand on that? Which is code for, I wasn't listening, and I don't really actually know what you were talking about.
Right.
Sounds a whole lot better than, I started tuning out and I don't know what to say now.
Right.
So if you can do that, you can start to train yourself to hear the whole, you know, the whole story. And if you go at it, and really my whole business development philosophy is that you don't need to be talking as much. And if you can get the client, the referral partner, the ideal client to start talking to you more and telling you more, you can actually take that and start to process it differently rather than feeling like you have to respond. They're not always looking for that brilliant, amazing answer right then.
I'm taking the two breaths. But no, that's a really good point. And it is it is a skill that people don't give enough credit to continue and practice, and certainly to raise your awareness of when you're not listening, because it is difficult all the time to pay attention to 100% of the content and to absorb all of it. And that's why I take notes, because it forces you to actually listen to what the person is saying rather than think about how you're going to respond to it. It is not debate club all the time. And sometimes you just want to have that meaningful conversation. Tell me a little bit about how that part of the journey and the biz dev journey started for you. So from practice, what's the link to practice? How did you start going down, coming up with your philosophy for business development and, approaching all of these things? As you've been doing this for a decade, right? How did you actually start? What was the trigger for you? Yeah.
So, unfortunately, my mom passed away. And when she passed away, I was still practicing. And I started realizing that, what was working still in my practice was that I had built up really great relationships with clients, and my team was really fantastic. And everybody around me was really supportive. And I started realizing that life happens, right? And how do we start, as I said earlier, how do you make things easier? And one of the things that I noticed is that when things were difficult, right? When those projects that just got under your skin and I think that's how we started talking about West Wing, is that I used to, leave West Wing on in the background late at night to keep me awake and kind of keep me company while I was still working. And what I realized is that if we could have stopped and had all the parties talking to each other and listening to what they really wanted to buy, right? Or wanted to sell or wanted to do in a deal, that the lawyer's job could be a lot easier, right? And if everybody starts off on the same page. And so I started kind of down this path of what does it look like? And started working with clients, not just on the practical, let's do the legal work and the nitty gritty, but can we go back 3 steps and start figuring out what would happen if we changed how we started the process? And that really got the ball rolling. And over time, I've realized that when you start doing that and you go to multiple clients and ask similar questions and start asking, what would it look like for deals to be done easier, contracts to be entered, in just a easier and nicer way, people had some common themes. And when you pick up on those common themes and then you deliver on it, people are really excited. And so that started the business development side of you actually got more work by making it the simple answer. And it was almost counterintuitive to what you'd been taught.
Yeah. And I think when we spoke about this, the really thing that stood out to me was, you approached them and said, look, I want to be able to help you negotiate better. So there's already some incentive for them to want to actually take interest in this, right? Because, of course, that's an important skill.
Absolutely. That was the whole thing was, let me make this easier for you. And I think I can do it this way. Are you game? And they were like, yeah, tomorrow. Right. And then I started realizing the more clients that you talk to, other attorneys and, collaborators, hey, what if we tried to do this, easier and still as efficient and still as high quality, right? That there's a huge amount of value in that.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point, because it's not about just taking shortcuts. It's not just about let's hack through this. It's about there is a more effective way to do this. And we are simply taking the path of most resistance in some instances for no reason other than we maybe don't realize we're doing it, or you don't realize that there is a better, more effective, or whatever other kind of way. And that's so super important. And you need someone who not really is an outsider, but certainly isn't always as emotionally vested into this, that can come in and say, well, there are clear blind spots here that you're missing.
Right. It's actually what I love most to do with clients, is to be the one to come in and say, do you realize like you're leaving this whole body of low hanging fruit that your clients, I'll bet you anything, would clamor for this.
Right.
Like, can we just go ask them? Right. And the minute somebody says, are you sure? And I'm like, just here, let's formulate your questions. Let's go out and find out. And they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, that was brilliant. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know it was brilliant, but it was worth really asking the questions.
Right. And are you having these conversations with your clients? Are they lawyers? Who are they generally?
I work with lawyers and service professionals, people who bring in business based on their knowledge, their expertise, providing high quality client service.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. And I asked that question because I can hear myself internally saying, oh, yeah, that's great and all, but that doesn't really work with lawyers, right? So that's an important question, because I think it does. Lawyers are special in many ways, but certainly they are applicable things here for them as well.
Lawyers like to start with by saying to me, that's just not going to work.
Right.
And I can give you case study after case study after case study where it has and will work. But what I say is, okay, but what has worked for you? Well, nothing. Okay, well, so the plan here is to continue to do nothing and not try. Like, at some point you have to just start. And yeah, everybody has their tweaks. This is not, I mean, forgive me, it's not ordering a fast food meal, right? You got to find what works for you and your clients and your practice, but it doesn't work until you start.
Yeah.
And start engaging the conversations.
And it's important as well, because certainly as you're speaking to someone, one of the things I'd actually really like hearing is if they tell me, it's like, well, we tried this and it didn't work, because at the minimum it shows you, look, they recognize there is a problem that they want to be able to solve, and now we just need to be able to figure out, how do we solve it? Maybe it wasn't the right time, maybe the approach was wrong, maybe there's a bunch of other factors that weren't involved, right? This is something that there is at least a need for, and now we figure out the approach and the execution points.
When I have new clients come on board, one of the first things they do in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks tops is go out and have 5 to 10 conversations. And there's a strategy to getting the conversations, to what's going to be said, all of that. And I say to them, listen, one of 2 things is going to really happen here. You're going to come back and be like, that was awful, right? Or home runs, right? And here's the thing, this is awful is actually as valuable, if not more so, than the home runs. Because the more you think something out here is like going to be perfect and it turns out it's not, then we get rid of it fast.
Yeah.
But what happens often, especially in the legal field, is that we let it marinate and we roll it out without validating it. And if we don't validate it up front, then we've wasted a lot of time, energy, resources, money, learning moments on nothing.
Yep.
So if you go have the conversations quickly, you can figure out whether you're going to hit a home run.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue. So thank you for setting it up on validating market data, right? Because we all have these instinctual things, and oftentimes they're right, and they've been developed over time and they've been honed in. Yeah, they may be right, but there are instances where you need to certainly validate that with data if you're making a business or strategy decision, or generally you're just like, oh, I don't think this will work, based on sometimes no information whatsoever, just your own biases. Explain first, assume I know nothing about this, not too far from the truth. What if someone says, well, how do I validate market data? What does that mean? And then if you could explore, how you would go about thinking through that. So
I'm going to use COVID, everybody's favorite subject of all time right now, as the example, right? So when the pandemic really hit and all of a sudden everybody was shut down overnight, the number one thing you saw flying out there from law firms of all sizes across the globe were really great booklets with a germ photo on front, right? And over again, when I spoke to clients, prospective clients, people who are hiring these firms, the number one thing I heard over and over again is, I'm not reading it. Can't touch it. Don't have time for it. It is not anything that I need right this second. It's sitting in a stack with all the other germ photos, right? It's not saying that the information in there was not valid. And it's not saying that it was a total waste of time. What it is though, if you know, look at, we need to be responsive to where our clients are at right this second. And we know they're in crisis. Picking up the phone and saying to 5 clients, prospective clients, people within the sphere, and there's a way to identify who the right people are. Talk to me. We know you're in crisis and we're not going to take time, and we are here to be your support system, not to be a drain on you. Okay. What we want to know right now is, what is it that are like your emergency buttons? We can't make a pandemic go away.
Right.
What is it? Tell us whatever you've tried or thought of that is falling flat. Okay. And again, we can't make a pandemic go away, but if we could give you a magic wand and fix something tomorrow, what's that? What is it that you need right now? You have 5 of those conversations, you're going to hear some common themes. And if they all say, we need the 5-point checklist to get our employees out of this office safely, working from home, and doing XYZ, right? And you hear that over and over and over again, checklist, checklist, checklist. Do you know what you go do?
Create a checklist.
You got it. You just validated it,
Yeah.
Right? So you didn't need necessarily the whole big shiny booklet. What you needed was the checklist. And I am not, by the way, I'm not knocking the booklets, and I'm not telling you absolutely, go make a checklist. My favorite is people say, well, Deb said. This is all for example purposes. Yep. But, it's why people say, there's some people out there in the business development world who say, don't take consultation calls. I will tell you up front, you initiate these 15 to 30 minute exploratory validation calls. And what's going to happen is you get a lot of data. And even if the person never works with you, you're going to be able to start showing that you're listening. Because when you roll out what they're talking about, their number one thing is she heard me. Yep. She was listening to me. And then they're really excited to work with you because you're not just one more person trying to sound smart. And they're kind of over that.
And I think there's a couple of points from there that stood out to me. One is the obvious one, that you're delivering on something based on feedback that you've heard from this individual or this group. The second is actually each of those 4 can benefit from learning about, at least in generalities, what the others are thinking, right? So you're actually able to give them information and some form of validation for, actually, I've had 10 conversations on this, and every one of them are experiencing the same thing as you, which they may know, right? But it just feels good to be like, oh, thank God I'm not alone on this. Thank God I'm not the only one, right? My business isn't messed up. This is kind of like everyone is experiencing this today.
It's just like finding out that your kindergartner is not reading the big chapter book like everybody thinks that everybody else's kindergartner is reading. And you can take a sigh of relief and you're like, okay, we're going to be okay. Right?
Yeah.
College is not on the line because kindergarten is not working out the way we thought it would.
Right.
Clients and client development is a lot like working with kids and working. I mean, that's just the communication style though, right? When you can have a real conversation and say to somebody, what do you want? Right? And what is it that we can do to help? Even if you can't be the helper, right?
Yep.
You can be the referrer.
Yeah.
You can go help them find somebody. And that is as valuable. You'll still be kept in the loop. You can still be that trusted advisor because you didn't try to fake doing something that's not in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. And I think that's being that connector to me is probably even more important than being the person, in some instances, being the person that's just giving you solutions, because you can't scale the solutions, right? There may be some things that you can do really well, and you will likely have some sort of a niche on, yep, I've got you. I can do this. Absolutely. But that works in one field. And if you've helped that person in that field, and if you've done a really good job, maybe they don't need to come back to you for a while. Whereas if you can be the connector, then you get to help them once with your specialty and you become that trusted person. They're like, hey, I need help with this. You seem like you helped me out before. You listened to me for once. Out of thousands of people that I've spoken to, do you know anyone in your network? And I think that has exponential value and benefits to everyone that people don't think about immediately.
Well, right. And like if somebody says to me, I want some software, right? I've got, in my law firm, this is what we're doing. This is our plan. What do you know? I am not going to say, oh, Deb's I barely can turn on my computer, right? Like I call all of you and say, so what do I do? But what I do is I say, look, I've got contacts. Let's go talk to them. We're going to find the best solution for you. And I want to be part of the conversation because it's interesting to me. I'm engaged. I understand like this piece of it. And then I help you along the way. It's also why I tell people you don't necessarily need to work with me forever. So the coach who says like, you can't leave me, that's crazy, right? Like I want you to have the business development skills and plan and strategy and then carry it forward. And there's ways to continue to work and grow, but you don't need to do that. Somebody can't do it just for you. You have to learn it yourself.
Yeah, and that's super important. And I think it's part of the whole reason I started the podcast and Fringe Legal is because I'm really interested in these things. They don't always directly impact me, but it's really interesting to speak to people like yourselves who are experts in this compared to me for sure. And, it's super interesting. It's super interesting and I learn a lot more and then, a bunch of other people can benefit from it. Going back to something you were talking about, as you were talking about validating, I think the other thing is when you're creating that checklist as per that example, right. I think it's important because you're not just creating this checklist because even if someone posts on LinkedIn, for example, it's like, stop sending us these germ leaflets, just give us a checklist. Cool. You can that's some form of validation. Someone is telling you what they want, but having those conversations, exactly why they want that. And what kinds of problems they want to solve. So you get to be even more specific. And all of that to say, I think it's important to have those conversations because that 15-minute is so valuable. And your kindergarten example is useful because I don't have kids, so I can't relate to this, but certainly when I've interacted with kids, they are pretty blunt, right? They will tell you what's on their mind, right? And yeah. I'm perfectly happy having that relationship with people in a professional way, right? They can be like, look, we want this. Can you deliver this? Yes or no? And that's okay.
So the coolest thing about LinkedIn right now is that it is this really evolving platform. And there's a lot of conversation and development going on out there. And the best part about it is if you've had these conversations and you've gotten some validation, and then you can go out there and take what you've learned and show the value on LinkedIn. That's real business development strategy because now you're going to hit more people and engage more people in the conversation. And then you can drive deeper and bring from those posts and that interaction more conversations. So your 4 conversations quickly become 12, right? And then once you're developing something, you don't have to recreate the wheel over and over again. I get asked this, I'm doing a strategy camp that launches next week actually, and it's because there is a piece of where you take the conversation and then you move it to LinkedIn and then you move it off. And it's not just a theoretical announcement board anymore, right? But you can really take it and make it evolve into that next layer of conversation.
And that's how we connected, right? Stuart Rasmussen connected us on LinkedIn just through a post. He was like, well, you should speak to Deb. And I was like, okay, cool. And then we took it off LinkedIn and here we are today. But I think you're right. And actually one of the questions I had, because you are prolific on LinkedIn, I am just curious, A, how do you find the time? And B, like, how do you manage that? And I asked this really in a selfish way because I don't feel like I have the same level of scalability on LinkedIn as someone like you does. I'm just like, oh my God, it is so much work just responding to so many comments. And you respond to hundreds. Yeah,
you want to know the truth? I am not on it nearly as long as people think I am. For sure less than an hour a day, for sure.
Really?
Okay. And people are like, oh, you're on all day. Nope. There's strategy to it. There's strategy of when you post, when, who's going to be around. And yeah, there's been a couple like Friday night random posts where somehow I got in a music conversation. And honestly, okay, it turns out I don't know anything about music because I had to Google every single song. And then my whole family started like listening to all this music. And we had this like whole, it ended up being kind of a party in my house because we ended up having to like research songs. And my husband's like, don't you know anything? And I'm like, really not. Yeah. But so knowing when and how to post and how the comments flow in, there's strategy there, but it doesn't take nearly as long if you've done the conversations. So I know, like I just did this with my Focus 30 group this week, where we took, what is it that you could rant about all day long, right? What are the important things out there that people who are trying to say they do what you do, but you know that there's other attributes that you really need to talk about, right? How is it that you show up differently? And when you start layering these pieces, that's all you're going to post about ever. You don't need, I mean, for me, I don't need to post about kittens and unicorns and crazy stuff because it doesn't fall within my wheelhouse, right? But I can rant about, you know, lawyers and knowing what you're talking about and being a person who's walked in your shoes. And I mean, that stuff just comes really naturally. And when you're talking about something natural, it doesn't take that much time.
Yeah.
So people have this idea. And to be honest, 1 year ago, if you go back and look 1 year ago, I was scared to death of LinkedIn. I never posted. I was not on LinkedIn. I can tell you for certain, both myself, my clients, it's a change platform. Like there is business and great client connections to be made there.
Yep, I can not agree more. And I mean, it's continuously evolving, and actually not just in terms of how many users are coming on, but how they're adding features. I think they added stories like similar to what you have on Instagram and so on very recently.
I did my first story last night. Oh, yes. It scared me.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll go check it out after this actually. So I'm glad you did it because I was looking at it. I was like, oh, should I do one? I have no idea. So excellent. Well, we have been talking for almost half an hour. We're nearly out of time. So we talked about the importance of listening, going out and, you know, validating your ideas by speaking to your clients, actually speaking to them and listening to them. We ranted and raved about Peloton in the West Wing, which is fine. In the last couple of minutes, and we obviously talked about how do you get your message out there at the very, very basic level. In the last 2 or 3 minutes, what's the one thing you might suggest if someone's listening to this and they are, you know, let's make it easy. They're a lawyer, they're an associate or someone like that, and they're like, I have no idea where to start, right? What's the one thing they can go out to get started today? How do they get started on just being more mindful around these topics and these practices?
I would email 3 or 4 colleagues and say, I'm working on a project, right? And I mean a legit project, don't make one up. Like we're going to work on a project, right? And I'd love to be able to pick your brain. Do you have 15 minutes? And even if you don't know what those questions are right this second, the minute you hit send and you get those, people love to share their expertise. They love to share their wisdom and their, you know, their story. You'll figure out those questions. You know, you can always find me. I'm happy to help. Like it's not hard, but once you start the conversations, it will roll. But you gotta just say, hey, I would love to touch base.
Awesome. No, that's really helpful. And if people do want to get in touch with you, I know they can find you on LinkedIn, evidently. And where else is anywhere else they should go to find out more about you, what you do?
My website is debfeder.com. And my email and all my contact information is there, and just be in touch. I'm happy to jump on the call anytime.
Amazing. Well, Deb, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and we can go deep on many of these topics, but I'll leave people to explore many of your musings on LinkedIn and elsewhere to find out more information, get in touch with you. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.